And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Here is your marine weather forecast for Alaska, and this will cover this weekend as we go from Sunday into Monday. It is Saturday, April 27th. We start out with the sea ice. The ice continues to melt off here along the edge. Polinia's areas opening up here along the lower Yukon coastline, up along areas of Norton Sound and especially south and the west side of St. Lawrence Island. And with the increasing sun angle, we're gaining at least 5 minutes of daylight each day. This will just continue to progress as we go into the month of May. As far as weather systems, nothing too terribly stormy across the state, and we anticipate there's this one area of low pressure bringing some breezier conditions, some gale force winds just off of the southwest coast of the Panhandle, and some light showers. But that's about the most notable system for this weekend. Ridge of high pressure extends through the central northern Bering along eastern Russia to a little stronger high up in the central Arctic Ocean. For Sunday afternoon, the low kind of wobbles back down, heading toward the North Pacific with lingering trough low pressure, a couple of weak centers over northwestern Canada. With the daytime heating, you're going to get some scattered light rain, snow showers. Otherwise, much of the mainland, generally dry, quiet weather. And another little weak low south of the eastern Aleutians, and then another system way out toward Japan and the Kamchatka Peninsula. So by Monday afternoon, we'll continue to see low pressure lag over parts of northwest Canada, and generally quiet conditions continuing across much of the mainland, south central Gulf areas, west coast, and then a little stronger low there trying to emerge into the southwest end of the Bering Sea by Monday afternoon and certainly Monday night. But in the meantime, we expect for Sunday's marine weather forecast near shore waters, the inner channels. Look for southeast winds 10 to as high as 20 knots, especially Stevens Passage down to Dixon Entrance, where waves could be 3-4 feet there. 2-foot waves within Lynn Canal. And then for the outer coast, winds could be as high as 25 knots out of the east, southeast, especially south of Sitka, with swells about 10 feet there. Winds will come down on Monday with southeast to south winds right around 10 knots for the inner channels. Waves a foot or two, Lynn Canal down all the way down to Dixon Entrance. The outer coast winds are going to go northwesterly and generally around 15 knots with swells of 7 to 8 feet, though variable winds off of Cape Suckling and swells there maybe to 6 feet. On Sunday, the northwestern Gulf, generally northwest winds, 15 knots within Prince William Sound, waves 2 to 3 feet there. 15 knots to near 20 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance along the Kenai coast. Also 20-knot winds out of lower Cook Inlet with swells around 4 feet. But variable winds get north of Anchor Point, upper Cook Inlet, variable winds at 10 knots and waves a foot or two. And then on Monday, we look for variable winds across lower Cook Inlet off the Kenai coast up into Prince William Sound outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Variable winds at just 10 knots, waves pretty minuscule there, a couple of feet, maybe as much as 4 or 5 foot swells off the Kenai coast. Southerly winds, though, as you get off at Anchor Point up to upper Cook Inlet to 15 knots. Winds will be westerly on Sunday around Kodiak Island at 15 knots. And some sort of westerly component there through the middle portion of the Alaska Peninsula. Variable winds to 10 knots. Either side, Cold Bay Faults Pass with waves there a couple of few feet. And on Monday, southwest winds around Kodiak Island to 15 knots. But variable winds across much of the central areas of the Panhandle, of the peninsula. Variable winds at 10 knots and waves just running a couple of feet. The eastern Aleutians, relatively quiet winds, variable to easterly winds 10 to 15 knots, maybe as much as 20-knot easterly winds, especially out west of Nikolsky and through the central Aleutians, turning back a little more southeasterly, picking up to 25 knots out there west of Kiska to Shemya. And then Monday, we expect northeast to east winds 15 knots over the eastern Aleutians, picking up to 35 to 40-knot gales west of Atka, with building seas approaching 15 to 20 feet once you get way out towards Shemya. And along the southwest coast, variable winds in the vicinity of St. Matthew and St. Paul at 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet. Look for northwest winds 10 to 15 knots waves a foot or so within Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, and north winds through the wider expanse of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon coast at 10 knots, with still a fair amount of ice there, though we are seeing some decent-sized openings develop. And on Monday, variable winds to 10 knots around the Pribilovs with waves 2 or 3 feet. South winds into Bristol Bay, north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay right around 10-15 knots. And then look for northerly winds, especially this outer part of Norton Sound along the lower Yukon Delta at 10 to 15 knots. As we go up through the Bering Strait, lower Chukchi Sea winds will be northerly 10 to 15 knots. As we go up, winds are going to shift to the east once you get north of Cape Lisburne. And generally, Wainwright on through Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, easterly winds to 20 knots on Sunday. And then for Monday, look for east-northeast winds 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coast, maybe as high as 20 knots out of the east, out of Wainwright. And then as we drop down through the lower Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait, we're looking at northwest to north winds right around 10 knots. And still, again, a fair amount of ice there is in place.